Uh, Good morning. Good morning. Not like anything's gone on this week. Just a slow week here in the Senate. No, in all seriousness, it's a pleasure to be here with you all in the midst of what is continuing to be the most uncertain session that I have ever experienced in this role and in the 15 years I've served in the legislature. We are facing questions that are harder and deeper than anything that I think any General Assembly has had to face in several decades. And as we are here with 25 days to go in crossover week, it is only becoming more and more real that we are more uncertain based on the federal landscape than we've ever been. I think all of us were bracing for a shutdown today, and we are now, at least as of last night, it looks like that is less likely. And so now we are all pouring through what is in the continuing resolution to understand how it may or may not impact Maryland. What we can say for sure is that with the new federal administration, we have more uncertainty in our system than we've ever had, and it is creating negative ripple effects across the economy. We know that we saw news from Johns Hopkins, and the cuts that have been done to USAID are now causing 2,000 Hopkins employees, 160 Marylanders, to lose their jobs. We know that we had several thousand U.S. Department of Education individuals who were summarily terminated this week without real clear cause or reason. That has now shut down the FAFSA system and created havoc for students who are applying for financial aid. We are seeing the impacts of what is a slash and burn approach to what is deemed government efficiency and really feels more like government destruction. Again, I've said this over and over. We should always be more efficient. We should be doing the things that it takes to make sure that we are using taxpayer dollars as effectively as possible. And we should be doing whatever we can to protect taxpayers from wasteful spending. What that doesn't mean is a ham-handed chainsaw approach to just cut and burn, because it has real impacts for real people. And there are families today in Maryland who don't know how they are going to move forward. They've lost their job without any notice and are reshaping their lives because of a philosophical approach to radically kind of destroy the federal government. Something's got to give. And so what we know is that that is going to impact Maryland in dramatic ways. And as we look to work with our partners in the House and with the governor, we have to be ever more mindful that the social safety net that we used to be able to count on from the federal government is quickly being pulled away. And so we have to focus on Maryland first, and we have to provide the safety net for Marylanders in this time of great uncertainty. And that is going to come at a cost where we're already making difficult choices. And so we've seen how challenging that is and what that looks like for Marylanders and for legislators, and how we're going to land this budget in such uncertain times. But I do want to just take one quick moment, and you'll see that there is a graphic here, because we have talked since the beginning of session about a balanced approach that starts with cutting as much as we possibly can. And in the budget that we're contemplating in the Senate, we are already talking about an additional $400 to $500 million of cuts on top of the $2 billion of cuts that the governor has proposed. So what's next? How do you get to the next gap closure measure if you want to cut? What's on the graphic here are 10 illustrative, real examples, things that we are actively contemplating incorporating into this plan. Things like dropping 11,000 people off of Medicaid, removing coverage of health care for every pregnant woman that's at 264% of the federal poverty level, looking at having to reduce dental coverage for individuals and seniors who are on Medicaid, having to drop 36,000 people off of food stamps, having 2,500 kids in the foster care system lose services. These are the very real costs of the next round of cuts. And so as we face these difficult choices, these are just 10 examples of how you get to the next billion. We have got to figure out a path towards sustainable revenues as well. And so that is the balanced approach that we are going to continue to try to take. And I as we are doing all of this, we know that we will still have to invest in core priorities, and we will still have to build, we still have to invest in infrastructure, we still have to invest in education, public safety, and we will. And so as part of that, in the midst of the challenge, I want to welcome up my friend and colleague, Senator Craig Zucker, who's the chair of our Capital Budget Committee, who has been working to hear all of the extensive needs that exist across the state and talk about our approach for how we are thinking through our continued investments in the face of such uncertainty. Craig. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Good morning, everybody. So, the Senate President was talking about a lot of the challenges that we're having, and it's important more than ever now that we focus on creating Maryland jobs, infrastructure, and community investments, and that's what the capital budget plans to do this session. We have taken a statewide approach, working across party lines and geographical lines in terms of making sure that there's no part of the state that doesn't feel the benefit of the capital budget. Mr. President, with everything going on, with all the chaos on Capitol Hill and the uncertainty, we want to make sure that we're investing in our institutions, our hospitals, our higher education facilities, making sure that we're continuing to be a leader on quantum computing. Maryland will continue to be a leader, but it takes an investment, a responsible investment to do that. So I'm expecting when the capital budget of the state of Maryland passes, we'll have more than $2.8 billion of direct investments that will create more than 14,000 direct and indirect jobs that could be seen and felt throughout the state of Maryland. We are working closely with the administration, we're working closely with the House of Delegates, and we're working closely with people on either side of the aisle to make sure that their voices are heard and their voices are listened to, and that we're putting Maryland first. We're going to continue to do what we can to create jobs, invest in infrastructure, and making sure that our communities throughout the state of Maryland are invested in.
All right. So we have questions.
Is the budget chart a scare tactic to make the business-to-business and other taxes more palatable?
Let me, one sec.
I was gonna ask something very similar. Start with this question about.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't even.
Oh, no worries. Okay.
I mean, could this be construed as a scare tactic, the chart, to make more palatable all the other tax increases that are currently being?
I'll tell you what, all of those cuts certainly scare me. And they scare me because they're very real and being contemplated. And if we are constitutionally required to balance our budget, we will. And we are going to make additional cuts. We are at the place now where we are talking about core service provision of the social safety net that's impacted if we just had a cuts-only approach. And so, yes, it is scary, and we know that this is what we should be counting on government to be able to provide, and I believe most Marylanders agree.
So on the business-to-business services tax, the business community obviously came out in full force this week to oppose that and to say how it would really hurt job creation. So when you're talking about all these Marylanders losing jobs, how do you kind of justify that particular move when all these businesses are warning that that could have a detrimental effect on job creation?
Look, I think, as I've said many times, the last place we want to be is dealing with new revenues. It should be the last option on the table. And so the hearing that we had around the sales tax for business services was to present another option and to have a menu of choices as we look at balancing the budget and bolstering the social safety net that we have to provide to have a Maryland first approach to protect people. It was an option, and I will say it's still on the table. We are trying to do whatever we can to remain competitive in the face of these historic challenges. We do expect that in any tax cut bill that comes at the federal level, that we know will certainly help the billionaires and uber millionaires out there, that we do expect things like capital gains and business tax reductions to happen as well. And so this is a balanced approach to make sure that we have the right resources to be able to maintain our social safety net and make sure that Marylanders who rely on these services can look to Maryland and understand that even in the midst of this uncertainty, we will still ensure that our basic public structures function.
So, sorry, just to clarify, how likely is it then that that particular tax would be one of the options that is supported, that you support in the Senate?
Look, there are a lot of negotiations happening with the House and with the governor. I think it is a very real possibility that that some version of it is on the table in the final menu.
Mr. President, does that mean that it would change in terms of like lowering the percentage at 2.5% right now? We heard, McCormick's talked about maybe pulling out some of its operations from the state because of that. Would that mean that you would lower the percentage?
I think that we have, we spent a lot of time really listening to what business owners said and what they present. That's why we wanted to have the hearing, was to hear the feedback and know that it was, going to be in many cases challenging, people that were very frustrated about how it could apply to them. I think we learned a lot of good lessons about how we can make some adjustments, things like not applying to 1099 employees that have individual or have sole proprietorships, looking at specific industries that may have a disparate impact. And so we're reviewing all of that now. I would say I would love to find a way to have a broader base and a lower rate, which I think is a more efficient tax approach. But we have to figure out how far we can get in cuts and then what the gap would be to see what we're going to need in order to be sustainable moving forward.
Related to the business-to-business tax and your comment just now that you wanted to hear, that the legislature wanted to hear what the business community had to say, one of the things that they had to say was that they often feel villainized by the General Assembly. They feel like the General Assembly treats them like an ATM. And they point directly to the Senate hearing where they felt very disrespected by Senator Jim Rosapep in some of his interactions with panelists. Does the legislature in some way either need to repair its relationship and the way it speaks to the business community, or does it currently have the appropriate language to speak to the business community? Do you owe the business community an apology?
Yeah, look, every single time I'm in front of any group of business leaders or employees, wherever it may be, one of the first things I will always say is thank you for investing in Maryland. It is absolutely essential that we see a thriving business community in order to drive economic growth, to drive economic mobility so that people can maximize their own potential. Businesses in Maryland are absolutely critical to our economic future. And it's why we're so judicious in trying to approach this, how we deal with this deficit challenge, because we do not want to become less competitive. I think that it is a balance, and we are making sure that we can hear from our business leaders, even in times of frustration, because there's not a single one of us, I think, that feels excited to be moving forward in the context that we're in. We are faced with the unbelievable uncertainty from the federal level, and that's making us approach very, very hard choices. I can't speak more to that other than the business community in Maryland is absolutely critical. Yeah, please.
I just wanted to add to that, Brian. So when we're looking at the capital budget, a lot of these non-for-profits and smaller entities are actually connected to chamber members. So when we're investing tens of millions of dollars in the capital budget, a lot of those are actually benefiting the local chambers of commerce and their members.
And one more thing, as I'm thinking, one of the questions I've also had in the last few weeks to a number of business owners, what does it look like to have 25% tariffs and then be told there's 50% tariffs on all of your goods, and then be told, well, maybe it's 200% tariffs on your goods? What we're seeing, the unpredictability that's coming out of the Trump administration is the worst possible thing you could imagine for businesses. And so that is weighing on all of us. I'm sure it's weighing on a number of business leaders today, that the supply chain costs that they had expected 6 months ago when they put it in order are now 100% higher when they come on shore for their manufacturing processes. This is not how you run a railroad. And so states are now left in this federalism system trying to deal with this craziness and protect our people in our state in the midst of just total uncertainty.
But is it a mixed message to tell the business community that you value them and want them to expand in Maryland, but also have them coming away with the idea that the legislature frequently is painting them as in their words, this was a direct quote, bad actors?
Look, I would never accept the premise that we think that businesses are absolutely critical in Maryland. Full stop. They are, our business community are essential partners in making sure that we can grow economic prosperity. And what I would also say is that one of Maryland's greatest assets are its people, its workers, who are highly educated, who are talented, who have unbelievable skills. And in many cases, that exists because we have invested in our system. We've invested in infrastructure, we've invested in buildings, and we've invested in people through public education, through healthcare, through public safety, by protecting our environment. And, so it is a partnership of, we need the private sector to create jobs, and government is there to support the underlying premise and that allows private capital and private business to succeed.
You talked about the uncertainty that businesses are feeling at the federal level. Might putting this kind of proposal out in whatever form compound some of that uncertainty when they don't know exactly what form you're going to push this through, if at all?
It's why we want to get to a decision as quickly as possible. Look, we have a 90-day session, and we have a short amount of time to make some very hard and challenging decisions. We want to provide that certainty as quickly as we can, and we will before we leave. And so we're trying to get as much feedback as quickly as possible. But by the time we leave, we know where we will be, and that will provide some level of certainty, even if it is kind of sharing the pain across, and that those who have done the best will probably be contributing more to help bolster our system with a Maryland first approach to bolster our public safety system.
On that uncertainty issue, last night a Maryland federal judge ruled that by Monday, approximately 24,000 federal probationary workers will be reinstated into their jobs, at least if the Trump administration adheres that order. Does that impact at all some of the calculations you're making, or the chaos of that, right? Knowing whether federal workers in Maryland will be employed or won't be employed, the burden on the unemployment system in Maryland, the Labor Department, how is that factoring into?
I mean, I would reframe the question. A federal judge determined that the Trump administration broke the law and unlawfully fired 24,000 people. I would say that's what was the court determined. And so, we'll see how this plays out in the court. What I think is most concerning about the probationary employees is that we need the best and the brightest in our federal government to help protect human safety here in the United States. And if you're a recent college graduate, if you're a new person moving into the federal government, if you're somebody that just gets promoted and has dedicated their lives but wants to move up the ranks and have to take on that probationary status, who wants to go work for the federal government right now? And what are we saying to this fundamental infrastructure of those folks who we rely on to get Social Security checks to people so that they don't have to be hungry, so our seniors are getting able to go to the grocery store? What about the folks that are making sure that our Chesapeake Bay is protected and that we're doing the right tests to make sure that we're not polluting it and have an economic future on the bay? Who wants to go into that industry with this type of craziness, into the federal government with this type of uncertainty? So, I think that's what I'm most worried about, is just the ping pong and how humans that are working in the federal government dedicated to public service are being treated. This is not a sustainable path.
But does that impact budget negotiations?
It certainly does. I mean, look, we take what's happening at Hopkins or the Department of Education, or even the park rangers at Fort McHenry in my own district. People are losing their jobs, and that means that we have to expect even more impacts to our income tax system, to our sales tax system, to our property tax system. We're going to have folks who are going to be more reliant on our public social safety net, be it Medicaid or the unemployment system, childcare subsidy if they don't have funds to send their children to childcare as they're looking for a job. And that is a larger cost for the public sector. And so we know that it's not just about balancing, it's also about supporting the increased needs that are coming because of the destruction of the federal government. Even if they are offered jobs back, I'm curious to see how many will take it, or how many will just throw up their hands and say, you know what, it's gotten too crazy, I'm doing something else. And that hurts all of us by not having talented folks in the federal government.
Concerning the blueprint for Maryland's future, DLS came out with their new projections of how much the blueprint is going to cost local jurisdictions. And if you compare that to the initial projections from 2021, we can see that they were pretty significantly off by hundreds of millions of dollars of how much more it's going to cost taxpayers. And DLS is saying one of the problems is that the blueprint was passed during the COVID pandemic, and the projections were inaccurate because we didn't know what the economy was going to look like coming out of the pandemic. And now that we're getting a better understanding of how much the blueprint is going to cost, in hindsight, was it a mistake to pass the blueprint during the COVID pandemic?
No, certainly not. Look, there's no better time than now to make sure that we're investing in a world-class public education system here in Maryland. It is our competitive advantage. Having a world-class education system is fundamental to building our economy. And so there's never a wrong time to be further investing in our education system and demanding results. It's not just about spending, which does matter. It's about results. And so the whole point of the blueprint was, if we are going to be investing more in public education, we want to see those results come forward. And that was the fundamental premise of what the blueprint was about. So I would say I would kind of push back on the premise that it was incorrect projections. It was a formula, and the formula did not account for the number of students that qualify for free and reduced lunch meals post-pandemic, and undercounted students who would be identified for special education services. And those two features are about individual student counts. It's a per pupil formula. And so they weren't wrong. It was that there was projections of the formula being on different assumptions, which happens in any type of public budgeting. So what does that mean? It means the students in our system have higher needs. And to think that we are going to just expect to be able to do the same thing with less is not realistic. We have to be honest about the fact that we have young people with higher needs, and we should be investing in them so that they can meet their fullest potential. We are going to have to make adjustments. It has to be sustainable. I appreciate the governor having a difficult conversation about what the out-year costs look like. I know he and I and members of the House all agree that public education is fundamental and is absolutely essential for the state of Maryland. It also has to be sustainable. And so those are part of the conversation that we're looking at this year as we look at the budget negotiations and how we can really bend some of the cost curves while putting in additional resources to sustain our social safety net, because we know that public education is critical, and if people are losing their jobs and children are losing healthcare coverage, we're going to have to step up in other ways too. And so that is the very real situation we find ourselves in as we try to close down this budget in the next 20 days.
The numbers are off by a pretty significant amount. It was like 9 to 10%. Just in this fiscal year, it's $700 million more dollars that taxpayers have to pay than what they were told it was going to cost just 3 years ago. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but the reality is taxpayers by law now have to pay $700 million more in just 1 year. That's a lot.
It's a formula based on need, right? And so I think that's an important component. We passed a formula that says that there are some students who have greater barriers to academic success. And for those students, as we've seen across the globe and across the country, those students need more resources to be successful to overcome those barriers. And there are more students who qualify and have those needs in Maryland today than were projected in 2020. And so it costs more. That is the reality. And the alternative is that we don't invest. We don't have a great system. We see an increased dropout rate in high schools. We see an increased juvenile delinquency rate, because what we know is that truancy is inherently related to juvenile crime and to young people getting involved in crime. And so if we want to create a society and where everybody has the opportunity to truly thrive, we have to invest in our public education system to give children a chance to meet their potential.
Mr. President, given the catastrophic effect of the cuts that are up on that chart and the thousands of people that would be affected, has there been equal weight given to a conversation on investing less in industries like quantum that are still at this point a concept?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's a very fair question. It's not an either or. And I think that it's very important in the midst of this that we have a both and approach. We have to reduce resources. It's just like with the capital budget, suggesting that maybe we just don't invest in infrastructure for a year. Sure, that would certainly close the budget gap, but it would turn our roads and bridges into a hellhole. And so, I think we have to be very intentional that we are going to have to do both things. We have to be able to cut our resources and invest in growth, because we know that in the future, we are going to have growth vehicles in order to balance our budget and have businesses thrive. And so I would say we have a competitive advantage here in Maryland because of our great institutions, and quantum is one of those things that has the potential for the state of Maryland, where we have a competitive advantage with one of the best companies that exists in this space, to set up the next 3 decades of leading the world in technology. And so we have to be able to be thoughtful and strategic and purposeful about making some bets on growth. And I think that's what sort of the quantum program and growth opportunity presents.
And how much are we investing in that?
Right now, it's, for the capital budget side, it's about 10 million so far.
And it's also not just the company, I would say, is the other big thing. It's also the research, and it's the basic science that leads to an entire industry's growth, which is different than just a specific a grant to a one company. This is about investing in basic science that allows for economic growth in the future.
And let me add to
Yeah,
that, Mr.
please.
President. So the other thing about quantum is that we could be a world leader on quantum. And this is the future of the world, and Maryland could be in the epicenter of it.
Mr. President, back on education.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave. You
Back on education, the governor's education bill looks like it's likely to go to a conference committee.
certainly.
Any early differences now?
Well, we have not moved a bill with the blueprint bill.
From the version from the House, it looks like discussions that it's going to be changed in the Senate.
Look, I think it will be changed overall because it's part of a larger negotiation about the sustainability of Maryland's finances moving forward. And so as we look at what might happen with Medicaid, about what could happen with our Medicare waiver, which is $4 billion from the federal government that, certainly after this week, we're having a lot more questions about. It is in this broader context that education is a component of what long-term sustainability looks like. And so I don't foresee the blueprint bill being the same as it passed the House. I appreciate our colleagues in the House and their commitment and dedication to public education, just like the members of the Senate have. And I think as we negotiate these bigger questions around transportation, around education, around public safety, and about our long-term sustainability and our safety net, there are going to be changes made.
And actually, on that note, can you speak to some of the differences that we could see between I understand that bill is going to be on the Senate floor today, so some of the differences we might see between the bill that's going to be on the Senate floor today and the one that passed out of the House?
Well, I would say, I don't think we have the bill on the floor today.
You don't have the floor?
No.
I don't, okay, I'm sorry.
We have not moved a bill forward yet. That's right. So I was trying to think of a. Did
I thought it was planned. Okay.
Yeah, no, look, it's part of a larger negotiation. And so I think, we are looking at how the out-year impacts of the formula will allow us to be sustainable and continue to invest in our social safety net in the midst of what is unbelievable uncertainty at the federal level and massive cuts coming down from the federal social safety net. So it's too early to say exactly where we land.
Baltimore City has proposed a 2% sales tax increase. Do you support that?
Look, I've said this before. I appreciate the mayor trying to think creatively about how to find funds, and I know he went for the sales tax because it's a lot of visitors who fund the sales tax. I appreciate him trying to think through different mechanisms for investing in infrastructure in the city. It's hard to see that moving forward this year in the context of our fiscal environment, and so I don't see it happening this year, but we'll stay in communication about how to make sure that we can invest in the city and make sure that it can thrive. And look, I think we're seeing positive signs. When we look at the census numbers and the city bending the curve in a positive way on population growth, that's a sign that something positive is happening. And so I think there are real opportunities moving forward. I just don't know that we, in the broader context of the state's deficit, that city-specific sales tax is possible.
Mr. President, looking at a bill specifically from a colleague of yours, Senator Jim Rosapep, when it comes to adding an additional tax to coal transports through the state, I know that the West Virginia Attorney General sent a letter to you and the Speaker urging you to not let this plan move forward, threatening litigation. Do you have any concerns about that bill?
Look, we are looking at this bill very closely. I'm very supportive personally, with the caveat that we're trying to evaluate it in the context of constitutional issues around interstate transport of goods. And so we are trying to understand the impact of the dormant commerce clause on this one. I am supportive of the concept, but obviously we have to do it to make sure that it's lawful before we proceed.
At this point, do you believe that bill will move forward this year?
We're considering it. It's very much on the table. We have to get some more guidance from our Attorney General before I know for sure.
Do you have a response to the Attorney General from West Virginia saying he will sue the state over it if it does pass?
No comment right now.
One of the top priorities for the Black Caucus has been a bill curtailing the automatic charging of youth as adults. And I understand that that bill is having trouble getting out of committee. Can you speak to your support level for this issue?
Look, this is one that we've looked at very closely. There are a lot of very good policy reasons to consider adjustments to our current system, and how the actual data works now is that we see more young people waived back than waived up. And so there is real reason to study this and to really make sure that we have the best policy in place. It's for the best for communities and for young people. I don't think this year we're going to see movement on direct file. We've seen a lot of challenges in the juvenile in the department. And so I think we want to see how some of the reforms play out within the system before we make significant changes that direct file would offer.
What immediate relief can ratepayers in Maryland expect to see as a result of the briefing that the legislature had this week?
First and foremost, I appreciated the briefing and believe that it was helpful to get a better sense of the complexity that underlies the energy increases that are happening. We are looking for any possible solution to get money into the hands of ratepayers to help with the burden of increased energy costs. We're looking for short-term solutions that we're looking for. Solutions is too big of a word because I'm not sure that there is a short-term solution. We know that we have to make decisions today that allow for longer-term solutions, getting more Maryland-made energy so that we have greater predictability, reliability, and affordability in energy. But we are looking forward to put some measures in the budget this year that will at least get some level of resources to ratepayers who are really struggling.
Will those resources, will that level be, and would you use the word meaningful?
Look, I think anything is meaningful, and it's in the eye of the beholder. We'll do whatever we can that is fiscally responsible for the long-term health of the financial health of the state to help ratepayers however we can, while building for the future. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President.
No. Okay. All right. Thank you all. Off we go. Double session day.